Good afternoon. This is Jermaine Reed. I'm with Fresh Start Family Services. You are in tune to Fresh Start Today, a radio broadcast that is solely dedicated to facilitating a local conversation between the general public and child welfare communities about what really matters to all of us, our children. I am so delighted to have in the studio with me today two individuals. We have Deborah Fields from the Sojourner Family Peace Center. Ms. Fields is a community education, prevention, and intervention coordinator. She also co-facilitates Beyond Abuse, which is a 23-week offender program. We also have Mr. Roman Thompson in the studio today, and we're going to be talking about the impact of domestic violence on children for the first segment. The second hour, we're going to be talking with Dr. Sebastian Sapija from Sebastian Family Psychology Practice regarding the art of mastering multicultural counseling. So we're going to be talking about diversity that second hour. But we're going to start off with the impact of domestic violence on children. Now, for those of you who have been following the program, you know that when we get started, we kind of talk about some individuals from the Maasai tribe over in Africa. In Africa, basically when the elders or individual citizens would greet one another, they will greet one another by saying, Kasiria Injera. Now, do you all know what Kasiria Injera is?
No.
Kasiria Injera simply means, how are the children? How are the children? And the concept or the attitude behind that was that, well, why are you asking about the children? Because everybody takes care of their children. And so the response that you typically want people to say is Sapati Injera, which simply means the children are well. So today we're going to be talking about a topic that is child welfare related. Now, I want to warn those who are listening to this program today that there may be some sensitive topics discussed. And we're going to start this dialogue out by listening to a clip of a 911 call that was made by a young girl. So if you have children in the room right now, which you might want to do just for the next minute or so, use that time to excuse them for the room, and then they can join the conversation afterwards. But I want you to hear this 911 call. We're going to go to break. We're going to listen to one song, we're going to listen to the 911 call, and when we come back, we're going to engage in this conversation. All right? Hey, this is Jermaine from Fresh Start Family Services. Did you know the absence of a loving, nurturing father can wreck the lives of children? Unfortunately, millions of children and youth grow up without a healthy connection to their fathers for a number of reasons: abandonment, unemployment, incarceration, death, etc. When compared to other children, foster children are at greater risk of not being fathered. Fresh Start Family Services is looking for a few honorable single or married men to become licensed as foster parents. Research supports that children and youth in our community need one caring, supportive adult in their lives to take them from being at risk to at promise. Men, our future is in our hands. We can make a difference in the lives of young boys today. To learn more about how you can become licensed as a foster parent with Fresh Start Family Services, please call 414-351-1100. That is 414-351-1100. Foster the future. Foster a child.
On the 21st, 1991, time 22:13 hours. This will be a 911 call, position CT07.
Standing emergency. Standing emergency.
My mom and Debbie are having a fight.
Is she hitting her?
Stop it! Send the police, please.
Okay, we're going to be there. We're taking your
Stop it! No.
Let me talk to you. Where's your mom?
What?
What's going on?
They're having a fight because this is bingo forever and ever. They always have this because he has a cousin. He's always drinking beer and getting drunk. And Mom,
What's his name? What is his name? Your father's name?
he's my stepfather.
Okay, how old is he?
No.
What's going on? Lisa? Fighting her? What's going on?
Sorry, Mom.
How's he hurting her?
He made his mommy.
Okay, don't cry. We're going to send the police.
Okay.
Okay, now where's your mother at right now?
She's in the room fighting with them. Okay, could you use them, please?
Yeah, they're on their way, but I'm going to keep you on the line until they get there, okay? Is your front door open?
Oh, no.
Okay, you go and lock it and come back to the phone so the officers can get in.
Just wait, please.
Okay.
He just knocked my sister out.
What sister that he knocked out?
My little sister.
You're
Fire. Oh, my God.
What's the matter?
Nothing happened. Just wait for the police. Wait, I want to go see what happened, please.
Okay, the police are on their way, okay? Hello? Lisa? The police are on their way, okay?
Mama, the police are coming. My stepdaddy's got the baby now.
Yeah, Lisa, where is he at now?
What?
Lisa, where? Hello?
So, now that was a call that a little 5-year-old girl named Lisa made to 911. And for those who are listening and maybe they want to review this again a little bit later, they can go online to YouTube and just type in Lisa 911 call. But as you can see, evidently there was some violence in this child's environment in her home. And it makes me think about that the world is such a violent place. Everywhere kids go, they are subject to violence, whether you're talking about in the church settings, school settings, playground. But most violence that children are subject to or exposed to happens right in the confines of their home. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. What can we do to eliminate some of the violence that children are exposed to? And one thing about domestic violence, Ms. Fields, and I'm sure you probably agree with this, is that it does not discriminate. You know, it makes no difference whether you're black, white, whether you are middle class, wealthy, or from lower income, status, but that domestic violence is everywhere. And
Absolutely, Jermaine. I mean, in the work that we do at Sojourner Family Peace Center, we see clients from all those different backgrounds. As a matter of fact, even when you listen to the news, if you pay close attention beyond the people involved and just look at who they are, where they live, you'll know that when it comes to domestic abuse and violence, it absolutely knows no racial boundaries, no boundaries at all.
Well, one thing I was reading online is that 3 to 10 million children, depending on what study that you're reading, but anywhere between 3 to 10 million children are exposed to domestic violence on an annual basis. That's a lot of children.
Yes.
That's a lot of children that's witnessing a lot of violence. And I was talking with someone yesterday, and they were saying, you know what? We live in a society that worships violence, where violence is perpetrated. You know, it's the take-by-force mentality. If you want something, whether you're talking about the government, you take it. If you're in a sports arena or sports setting, you take it. You want the prize, you take the prize. So we live in a violent environment. Children are exposed to so much violence when you turn on the TV, when you are playing video games. You know, there's so much violence permeated in our community. And so one would think that violence has to have an impact psychologically, emotionally, and physically or medically on children's lives.
But the majority of people who understand that are people who are knowledgeable, people who seek out information.
Okay.
The average person doesn't understand the research about how different things and environments affect their lives. They just go about their daily life. And then if they really don't see a difference, if they really don't appreciate how a particular type of behavior is affecting their children, if they're not making that connection, then it would be easy to dismiss the idea that this child being exposed to violence. And then that's the whole idea. We talk about violence, but before there's violence, there's abusive behaviors.
Okay, we're going to get into that. So what are the programs that Sojourner Family Peace Center offer to the community?
Our programs that we offer, of course, are the 24-hour domestic violence hotline. It's a shelter. Our shelter is an emergency shelter, 48 beds. Our 24-hour hotline that covers all of Milwaukee County and the surrounding community areas, as well as a program we call Family Advocacy and Support Services. not everyone needs to be in a shelter,
Okay.
but people do need help. And so we have an advocacy team that are there to support the individual as well as families in all types of situations. Sometimes you have people facing eviction, so we work with those individuals who, because of a relationship, are looking at being evicted from their homes. We have a program called Domestic Abuse Victims Advocates. Those advocates work with individuals who may be having to deal with the criminal or civil system.
Okay.
And so we have advocates in just about every area that affects a person's life. We operate and staff the restraining order clinic downtown.
Okay.
We have a program called Community Domestic Abuse Advocates Program, CDAP for short.
Okay.
Where in all of our local police stations, we actually have an advocate that works in that police district. There's 7 districts, so we have advocates in each of those districts where a person can walk in and ask to speak to a domestic violence advocate.
So do you work strictly just with women, or do you work with men as well?
Absolutely not. We offer all of our services to all adult individuals. The only thing that we don't provide for men is a safe place.
Wow.
That is the only thing.
So where am I supposed to go if somebody beating on me?
Exactly.
That's what I want to know.
All right. Well, the thing is, what we say is we will give you the same service. We will talk about personal safety plans, and that personal safety plan will look at where could you go. The reality is men have a better chance of being able to get housing or being able to go to somebody else's house much more easily than a woman, and especially a woman with children.
Okay. All right. So it's good to know that you're serving both populations, both men,
Absolutely.
women, and children, family, because we do have okay. So regarding this 3 to 10 million children who are exposed to violence on an annual basis, in what ways are they exposed to violence?
Well, some of the ways that they're exposed to violence is when children are in a home where parents argue, and the arguing escalates to pushing and shoving. Unfortunately, a lot of times we don't see pushing and shoving as violent behavior.
Okay.
We just see it as we minimize it and say, well, I only pushed, I only grabbed. But that is violent behavior. And so it starts out with simple things such as consistently being exposed to pushing and shoving. Escalate that to some slapping, some hitting, some punching, things like that. And kids will see that on a regular basis.
Okay. Well, we're going to talk about this violence that children are exposed to and how it impacts them. So these children who are witnessing these acts of violence, abusive exchanges, physical, violent, aggressive exchanges, how do you think they feel about that? You know, clearly we saw this young lady, we heard this young lady in this video clip. You know, can the other children who you work with, can the children who you work with identify possibly with what emotion she had and the intensity of her message and the situation she was in?
I think your audience would agree what you heard was fear.
Okay.
Fear, the idea of something is happening, someone is being hurt, and powerlessness. I can't do anything to help this person who is in serious trouble. So a lot of our children we know experience fear, for one thing, and the idea of powerlessness. My mother, my father, someone is being hurt in my household. What can I do about it? And if I haven't been taught what to do, then I feel that sense of what can I do? I feel helpless. And so
hopefully we'll be able to talk about what kids can do if they are exposed to violence. But here's the thing. When violence is, you know, we're talking about the feelings of kids. So sometimes I think there's shame and embarrassment, you know, that kids don't want to talk about it. And two, with this whole shame, embarrassment, and silence is that when you're taught in the community that what happens in my house stays in my house. This is indoctrinated, ingrained in kids, and even in the foster care community when there is violence that's going on toward children who have been exposed to violence in previous settings learn to be silent about that violence. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about feelings, the guilt and embarrassment and the shame, you know, is it common that when a kid is exposed to violence in their home setting that other extended family members are not aware of that violence, or do you think that people know that the violence is going on?
And it depends on the family, the connections to that particular child, and how intricately that family is with each other. So that, yes, it's possible for a child to be experiencing violence in the home and for relatives to know about it but not be saying anything about it, or even not really be aware of it, depending on how the child is behaving. And that's some of the research that's been shown, because you will have children who are consistently, and Jermaine, I really have to do this.
Go ahead, do it.
You keep using the word violence, okay?
I'm sorry.
And you're
Correct
right.
me.
No. You use the word violence, but it's important that we talk about abuse, because all abuse is not violent, but these children are consistently being exposed to abusive behavior. And for some children, the leap from abusive behavior to violence is not that far. There have been many children that have grown up in abusive homes where they didn't see the physical violence, but they themselves as adults became violent.
So we should talk about domestic abuse
And
versus
violence.
and
Domestic
violence.
abuse and violence.
Okay, that's a good teaching point. So y'all got that listening audience. It's not just about violent behavior, because not all violent behavior is abusive behavior, but all abusive behavior is violent behavior.
No. All abusive behavior is not violent.
Well, see,
If
I need to come to your class. I need to come to your class. He can't do this on air right now.
If I consistently cuss you out, demean you, am I being physically violent with you? Am I being
not
violent?
physically, but you're
am I
verbally.
But am I being violent the way we define violence? See, that's the thing. In our community, now you going on this intellectual thing here.
I'm sorry.
But
Let me-
our community, when we use the word violent, the average person thinks about physical violence.
True.
And that's why I want to make the distinction, because all abuse is not physical violence. And I want our listening audience, if we're talking about children, it's important to understand, when you're calling this child little nappy head this, and when you're talking like that, that's abuse.
Okay.
But our community would say, well, I was just trying to get trying to get the kid to do right, so forth.
I got it. I think I got it. I may have to have a recap a little bit later offline, but I think I got it. I really appreciate your insight in talking about that, expanding on that. Do children, when we talk about keep violence a secret, and if they keep violence a secret, why do they keep it a secret?
For several reasons. And probably most prevalent reason is the fact that children are told, you don't talk about what goes on in our house. And it could be anything, but violence is one of those topics that no one wants to talk about. Even when we know what's going on in our families' homes, we don't talk about it. And so instinctively, kids learn how to not talk about it, as well as they're told, you don't talk about the things that go on in our home, especially if they're things that are negative or perceived as bad, or things that can get consequences that we don't want.
Well, one thing I would like to talk about, when we talk about children not talking about violence, but yet they're exposed to violence, what extended family members' response is to the violence that's happening in their loved one's home. I want us to expand on that a little bit further. But what I would like for the listening audience to do is to feel free to join into the conversation by calling 414-444-5250, 414-444-5250. I'm gonna pose a question to the audience, and that is, why do you think that men abuse women, or why do you think that women stay in abusive relationships? So we're going to take a break. We're going to come back. Feel free to join the conversation, but we're going to continue this dialogue about the impact of domestic violence or domestic abuse and violence on children.
Heart and Soul Radio Talk Show, where organizations, the community, entrepreneurs, and artists promote, communicate, educate, motivate, having fun at the same time. On Saturdays from 8 to 9 a.m. and Thursdays from 3 to 4 p.m. on WNOV 860 AM, The Voice.
So we're back, and you're listening to Fresh Start Today, and we're talking about the impact of domestic violence on children. And we have in the studio with us Miss Deborah Fields from Sojourner Family Peace Center and Roman Thompson. We were just talking about violence, children keeping secret, the feelings that children experience when they are in a domestic abuse and or violent situation. And what I just learned is that there's a difference between domestic abuse and violence.
Being abusive and being violent.
Are
Yes.
two separate things.
You can be abusive without being violent.
Okay, so that's one thing I've learned for today. And I'm sure before this conversation over, we're going to learn some more PowerPoints. But let's talk about co-occurring abuse, because research shows that children, first of all, define what is co-occurring abuse.
The way I understand it is when two people in a relationship are being abusive towards one another.
So co-occurrence. Now, a lot of research shows that children, and I'm going to take that a step further, that a lot of children who are in a domestic abuse situation where there is abuse, physical, verbal, emotional abuse that's going on in a home environment, that the person who is the perpetrator of the abuse, being the parent, that they will also abuse not only the other parent, but also the children. So there is a close connection between domestic abuse or violence and child abuse. So that's the other word for today, is co-occurring abuse, is when there is abuse that's going in between each members of the household in different levels of abuse. Okay. So when we talk about that, child abuse, how do we control for that? Because a lot of times, children come to the attention of the system because they've gone to school. So what are the behaviors that we see in children that may be a sign that, this child may be living in a domestic abusive situation? What are the signs?
One of the signs might be aggression itself. Some children, because that feeling of helplessness, actually will turn and become aggressive. I had a situation where I got a call from a school teacher because a child had pushed a desk into another child. Well, what we found out was that child had seen his father beat his mother with a baseball bat.
Wow.
So sometimes children's aggression is the result of being in a home where they're experiencing powerlessness, but they're going into the school environment and they're exercising, they're using that helplessness and they're flipping the script, and then they themselves are becoming. Now, that's not always the case, but another situation would be children who are lethargic. They're not paying attention.
Okay.
It's hard for them to focus. Think about it. This child is consistently thinking about what's going on at home. What happened last night? How is things now while I'm away and I can't see what things are going on? So my ability to be able to focus is very difficult. Maybe I didn't sleep last night because they were arguing and yelling and screaming so loud that I couldn't get any sleep. Inability to do my homework. I can't concentrate because I'm living in this sense of fear of what next? What's going to happen? Did it end or is it still continuing? And then children who at one time may have stopped wetting the bed, start wetting the bed again. Sometimes children who suck their thumb. So there are any number of indicators.
Wait a minute. What's sucking your thumb got to do with violence? Is that soothing or something? What is that?
Yes, the idea of making myself feel better, doing what I can to make myself feel a little bit better. And so the whole thing, because a lot of times we assume that it's children that show a lot of aggression that are the problem children. But what research also showed was that many children who were doing well in school were also suffering in silence. This is the situation. So this child is, if I do everything right, if I get good grades, if I'm well behaved, maybe dad won't beat mom, maybe dad won't beat me because I'm doing really well. And so the people were ignoring the kids who were doing really well because the assumption was they weren't being affected by the violence or the abuse in the home because they appeared to be doing okay.
Now listen, people want to join this conversation. They can call 414-444-5250, 414-444-5250. Now you talk about this aim to please behavior that children who have been exposed to violence may exhibit. So the point there, what I'm walking away with, is that children respond differently to the abuse or violence that's in their home or even community. So violence does not affect every child the same way. And just because a child is excelling academically or is an overachiever does not necessarily mean that they are not being abused.
Or experiencing the abuse. Yes.
Okay. Now, in abusive relationships in a home environment, typically, historically, people have always focused on the primary victim. The primary victim being who?
The woman.
The woman. What about? Wait a minute. Some men are primary victims. I'm telling you, Miss Sophia's out there somewhere. But that women or one of the parents is the primary victim.
Yes.
And the children will be considered the secondary victims.
Yes.
Okay. So now research has changed that even when children go to doctors, that they're asking questions related to whether or not these children have been exposed to violence. Because I would have never thought, just in general, I would have never thought, and I've worked with a number of kids over the years, that because this child is wetting the bed, that perhaps that is a direct link or connection. Oh, you can join the conversation anytime you want to.
That was me. I was just saying that was me.
Oh, that's wrong.
I didn't realize that was an issue or that was part of a problem. I actually wet the bed until I was almost 11.
Right.
And like I said, I was a child of abuse. My mom.
Well, now wait a minute, because we're cousins, and I remember you sometimes you used to wet on me while you was in the bed.
That's
See,
right.
I didn't know that it was related.
And I didn't tell anybody either.
Oh, well, you just told everybody in Milwaukee.
Well, hello, Milwaukee.
But thank you for sharing that as an adult, because it'll help others.
It will help others, but I didn't know that. You know that. And I don't know, I mean, you think that children are at rest, or you think they're dreaming about violence, or how does the body responding to this violence?
Researchers suggest that it's the idea of not having any control. And so for children, whether it's about dreaming or the inability to control their body functions, it is still the idea that they don't feel that sense of having control over themselves.
Well, no, let's go back
Or
to
their
this.
situation.
Let's go back to this wet in the bed, because I'm kind of stuck there for a minute.
Okay,
Because-
now I'm not a doctor.
No, you're not a doctor. Let's talk about this. Wait a minute. So some kids who are exposed to domestic abuse or violence, and the thing that I think we need to really talk about is that domestic abuse is not just talking about mother and father abuse, but it's also child abuse. It's parents who physically severely discipline their children. That creates a certain degree of anxiety and frustration, fear, anger. Violence begets violence. So when we talk about domestic violence, it's not just talking about man, woman.
Right.
So in those situations where children are experiencing physical violence perpetrated against them, they go to the bed and they urinate in the bed, and then they get a whooping for what? For peeing in the bed.
Exactly.
You know, so it's interesting that you made those connection correlations. So I may be a little slow, but I'm getting there. So let's talk about the relationship aspect. So we've kind of talked about what the effects look like. You know, their eating habits can be impacted.
Absolutely.
Their socialization, their social skills impacted. Their ability to learn is impacted. But what about
their physical ability, their mental and emotional ability? Every aspect of that
their
child
life
is affected.
is affected by domestic abuse and violence. Now let's talk about that relationship in a situation where a father or a man and woman are fighting. And I can see how a child could feel helpless in that situation. Just like the little girl that was calling on the 911 call. She was helpless. She was afraid. She was helpless. She was concerned about the safety of her mom and her sister, who was just something happened to her sister in the car. But when we look at this and we say, okay, what about the relationship between that abused parent and the child? Because sometimes, let's just use a man, for example, that he's been abusive to the mother, and he'll make statements like, you see how stupid your mom is? You see? And the children are expected to do what?
To realize the mother is stupid because the father is
right,
explaining and demonstrating why he believes she's stupid.
And respond. And so how much do you see that happening? You know, even when the father or the abuser is removed from the picture, and now you have the situation where that parent is parenting these children that witness all that violence. Do you see that relationship impacted?
Yes, and the reality is, and we want to keep in mind, all of us find different ways of coping with different situations. And I'll give you an example. I was out doing a speaking engagement, and this lady said that her husband used to slap her. So they finally got divorced, where her 3-year-old son started slapping her. Wow. Remember that in a home, children are learning the behaviors. They're being shown how to interact with the other person in their home. And so what can be predominant, in some homes, a child might say, and I've had this where people say, I'm never going to do that. I'm never going to do that. And for the longest time, they don't. But then all of a sudden, one day, they find they've done something that they said they would never do.
Right.
Because you've been exposed to this repeatedly, and it almost becomes a part of who you are.
Wow.
I can attest to that. Like I said, that was me. My mother she had me when she was 15. I remember my father actually beating her, and I remember him leaving, and I remember her beating me. You know, I remember waking up tied to the bed. I remember waking up tied to the everything. I was locked in the rooms. She was gone for occasions, being locked in closets. And when the door opened, I remember peeing on myself, out of fear. So my question to you is, like, as a child, and like I said, when you guys were speaking before, I didn't have anyone to turn to. I went to school. I did what I had to do. I didn't really have any friends, and as far as family, I really couldn't tell anybody. They had their own problems. They had their own situation. So, what would you say for a kid that was in my situation? What can we do?
The reality is people think that they don't have anyone to turn to, and there are resources. Even in all the years that you were in school, and you may have been a shy person, and with all that you were experienced, you were definitely not going to be volunteering. But maybe there was a teacher who you had a little bit of trust in. Maybe there was some adult in your life who you felt that you could have a little bit of a connection to begin the process of revealing some things so that adult could ask questions. Now, the problem becomes when we start to talk about the issue of domestic abuse and violence, it is such a sensitive subject.
Yeah.
And if we don't educate ourselves, we don't know what to do. So a child may come to me and say, hey, Miss Deborah or Auntie or whatever, this is what's going on. If I'm not educated, if I don't know about resources, then my options of how I handle it might be very limited. And it could be anything from brushing it off to let's talk to somebody, let's call somebody, let's speak to somebody.
I kind of remember when y'all stayed on 39th and Brown, and I was, my mama sent me over by your house, and I don't know if you didn't clean your bedroom or what happened, but before I knew, your mama had one foot on your chest and the other on mine. I was like, why my mama sending me over here?
Exactly.
But yeah, violence and abuse is very serious, and we're going to have this conversation, talk about it. We have a caller on the phone. Caller, you have about 6, is that Kathy? Is this Kathy? Hi, Kathy, if you could make a quick comment or offer some information in 60 seconds.
Well, I prefer to call back. I have a very good insight on people, and what we need to do is have, you want to call it group therapy. They need to be programs in school or in study hall in high school or junior high school level, because they see that at that age, and some of those kids are abusive to themselves and their friends because they're at home. So we need to mentor the men and the women in high school, and flyers or something, letting them know as they get out of school, this is what's expected and what you should do and look out for, because we need to train the men as well and give them some therapy, not just put them in jail and give the women therapy too, because it's a pattern, like he said, in the history of generations going back and forth with this. And there are some women that abuse men, but I'm not going to feel sorry for the men to a certain extent, because it's not going to happen like that. So we can be kumbaya, but it's just...
Kathy, these women need to stop putting their hands on these men.
Well, there's some women that do that. I had a cousin. She used to hit her husband on the arm, and he wouldn't respond to her. And so I said, "Would you get your hands off of him?" I said, "What are you doing?" But back in the day, men did that, and they still do that. And some women, and most men, a lot of them live with these women, and on a women's rental agreement, not on their own. So a lot of these women are very weak-minded. They feel that I got to have somebody, no matter what it is, I got to have that man in my bed with me at all costs. And most of these men are not their spouses either. Let's just get that straight. Some are, but 90% of them in the black community are not their spouses. They want to say that's their fiance. They never even gave them a ring.
Kathy,
but they're very...
I don't want to cut you off, but I just want to talk, because you started out by talking about some of the things that we could do, and you talked about group therapy and the kids. To me,
you're going to put a woman in therapy. You got to put the whole family.
Wait a minute,
Kathy.
Wait, because it's not just group therapy. It is about educating our community about relationships, and that
Healthy
begins in school.
Yes.
Begins in the schools.
Yes.
Typically, when I get a call from a school, it's usually after there's been an incident, and then they want me to come in and conduct healthy relationship classes. But that needs to be a core part of some of the programs, the curriculums in our schools, talking about what does it mean to be in a healthy relationship. That helps us begin to build that trust.
Right. And if you
but a lot of us don't know what a healthy relationship model
because that's all
looks
they know
like.
at the time. So we can talk with them in a younger age group to let them know, so this pattern won't follow them, and they end up in criminal trouble themselves. So we need to talk with them about that, and we need to get flyers out about this. It's like early education for voting. You want to talk to these kids at an early age. Even just having children, that you're responsible. If that child hurts himself or someone beats up their baby at 15 or 12, you're still responsible because as an adult for that child.
Kathy,
all right.
Kathy, I repeat, I'm doing that. The only problem is...
And we're going to have to go to our next caller, too.
I volunteer for free to come out and talk.
We're going to respond to your call question, to your call, Kathy. And if you get a chance, like us on Facebook at Fresh Start Today, Kathy, okay? And be sure to call back.
All right.
The only thing is like I said before, I'm out in the community, and I talk to kids, and I joke and I say from K, whatever the first K is, about relationships. What are hands for? Hugging and shaking hands. So I'm doing that. But the problem is, it's usually that I'm being called to do it. It's not that it's a part of what we're doing. It's not a part of the education that's going on, whether it's in the schools, the churches, anywhere. Typically, that is not what's going on. So more education absolutely needs to be done.
So let's talk about what are the chances that children who witness violence will become violent to their peers? Is that pretty high?
Yes, about 50%.
Or to their mates? So
50%
about
of
50%
children who live in a home where they're consistently exposed to violence will become either a victim or a perpetrator.
So what are the messages that abusive parents are sending to their children? What messages are we sending to our children as it relates to violence, power, control, and conflict resolution? What's the message?
The way to get what I want is to overpower the other person, whether I'm using words or my hands or some physical instrument. The message is the way to get what you want is to be the person in control. And being in control, I can use my words to be in control. I can use my hands or a weapon. There is no resolution or conflict resolution in the way that we are taught to think of that, in terms of figuring out what do we both want, how can we both get what we want by sitting down having a conversation. That's not what's going on. It's typically one person that's yelling, screaming, and doing all the arguing to try to get what they want the way they want it.
All right.
I have a question for you. For kids that were raised in my situation, or where my mom was a single mom for the majority of the time, like I said, and most of her relationships were abusive or non-fundamental to her, and all I saw from her was, what she's gonna do for me, what I'm gonna do is whatever she says, and nothing else mattered. So growing up as a kid, I didn't know anything different. I didn't know that was wrong. I didn't know that there was other ways to go about it. So how now as an adult, am I supposed to be able to deal with that? Right now I'm having my own situations, and I have 4 daughters, and I don't want them in that situation. So I pulled back initially too far. Well, I've never put my hands on any of my kids. I won't let anybody put their hands on my kids. But at the same time, I'm in a relationship where if she says something too slick, it's for me to push that issue until she puts her hands on me, which gives me an excuse to do the same to her.
But unfortunately, a lot of times how people come to a point where they, as an adult, realize that is when there is a situation like what you're talking about. And what we try to do in our program, and I can only speak for our program, Beyond Abuse, is try to get an adult to realize that the behavior they've been exhibiting, while you may get compliance from a person, it's temporary. Right. And you're having a greater effect on that person as a human being. It's not uncommon for women who have been in long-term abusive relationships to become abusive. That's not uncommon. I don't know your mother, so I can't speak to what happened that caused her to become abusive. Right. But it comes down to the fact that there was no intervention, there was no time for healing for her, there was no way for her to look at and see what she was doing to you in her behavior. So now here you are, this adult who you're recognizing, however that came to be, that that's not what you want. But it sounds like you're also in a situation where sometimes you're a victim in this relationship. But remember, for the most part, we're talking about men's violence against women. And there is a difference, and we don't have time to get heavily into that. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you are experiencing some abusive behavior. Mm-hmm. And the idea is, do you understand what it is? What are you looking to get out of the relationship? What control do you have over you? Because the reality is you don't have any control over the other person, but you can articulate what it means when that person behaves in a certain way and how it's impacting you. That's the one thing where, for me, men have not done a good job, is articulating how they're being hurt. Men don't want to talk about, I'm hurt.
Well, how can we? I mean, it's considered either it's emasculating or it's not manly for me to go to one of my male friends and say, man, I'm hurt.
My wife
She-
beating on
right?
me. My wife hitting me.
Yeah,
You know,
she cussed me out, whatever
Right.
it is.
So, but let me ask you, because I'm glad that Roma, you chimed in here, because I'm going to ask you, why do you think men hit women or boys hit girls? Why do you? Because you've admitted that
Right.
you were physically abusive to.
I've been on both sides.
You've been on both sides.
Right.
Okay. So do you see a link or connection between?
I do now.
You
I
do
do
now.
now, and it took me to be in a situation with my daughter over visitation for me to get in this situation, for me to realize, and it boils down to a lack of respect. I didn't have respect for myself as a child. I felt like it was taken away from me, and as a man, I felt like I'm gonna get that respect, but because I never had it,
achieved that through
right,
violence.
right,
through
right.
abusive-
I've never had it, and the problem with my thinking was I didn't have respect for myself. So if I hit a woman and she stayed, I didn't have respect for her.
How old were you when you first hit a female? How old were you?
18, I would say.
You know, if you allow me to go in the treasure chest, can I pull something out? Because I remember.
Okay,
Now-
I might be. All right,
Let's
go
go
ahead.
when you stand on 27th Street. See,
Oh,
I've known you
okay.
all your life.
That's
on
right,
27th
that's right,
Street,
that's
and I
right.
remember sitting downstairs, and he had company, and next thing I know, I heard this person screaming and screaming. And remember, I'm in high school, he's in high school, but he was literally whooping a young girl with a belt. And I was scared, didn't know what to say, but I think it actually happened before you were 18. And
Might
so
have been, yeah.
when we think about abusive relationships, that there's probably a lot of young girls out here who are in abusive relationships. And you talked about being a father.
Mm-hmm.
So as a father, you say, I'm not going to tolerate, I'm going to allow, but did you ever throughout this journey put yourself in a position of that young lady's father?
I didn't at that time. Like I said, as well as I know, the way I was raised and what I saw growing up, speaking to belts and whoopings, I was lined up on the sofa with my aunties, and we all got whooped by my uncle. So,
And I was a witness. I had domestic violence going on, abuse going on in my home as well. So it's not that, and so sometimes I think this can happen within a family,
yes,
the culture
absolutely,
of a
absolutely,
family,
absolutely.
where, we came up in a time where you just didn't get whooped by
Yeah,
one person
you were sent
for the
to
same
get
offense.
other
So I think there's a caller right there.
Before we go to that call, can I just make one comment,
Sure.
Jermaine? Because we're using two words interchangeably, respect, and we're not getting respect when we be violent. We're getting compliance.
Exactly.
Because I can do what you
Okay.
say and
Right.
not respect you.
Right.
So I want us to be real clear about when you try
That's
to
why
do
we got
that.
you on this program.
exactly.
when you do that, you're getting compliance, but you're not getting respect.
Right.
Okay, so when we talk about this generational violence, not Roman, I've heard people say that she made me hit her. What are your thoughts about that?
That is a farce. That is the furthest thing from the truth. What happens is if in my situation, if I wanted something and I couldn't think of an intelligent way to get it, I would pick a fight. And that's the majority of what it is. Like when you're speaking to respect, like you said, it's not about respect because I didn't have any for myself at that time. I definitely couldn't have any for her. So compliance is what I was looking for, and by all means, I'm going to get it. And it's selfishness and it's childishness, and and there's no excuse for it.
And I appreciate your ability to be able to admit to that, because a lot of times people think that when they behave in a certain way, and you said it, you didn't have any other way of getting what you want. When we don't know how to get what we want in a different way, but we've seen the behavior that says, if I do this, that'll give me what I want, then I can easily go to that.
All right. Well, this is an interesting dialogue. And again, if people want to join this conversation, they can call 414-444-5250. Somehow, some way, we're going to have to get to a place where we can create safer home environment for our children, because home life is critical to the success of our children. It's foundational. So we're going to take a quick break right here. We're going to actually, what I want you to do is I want you to play this clip, because we're talking about domestic violence, and too many of us out there doing the what you call it, the Ray and Janae, the Ike and Tita, and Harpo and Sophia.
What I'm gonna do about Sophia?
Beat her. told Harpo to beat me. It was that mule, Paul. Old Joey, old Joey the mule, I tell you, I was out there trying to plow that north field, and the mule just went crazy. He started kicking and bucking, hit me right there, bust my eye, bust my lip. All my life I had to fight. I had to fight my daddy, I had to fight my uncles, I had to fight my brothers. Girl, child ain't safe in the family men's. But I ain't never thought I had to fight in my own house. I loves Harpo. God knows I do. But I kill him dead before I let him beat me. And that's a hoof print. Does it look like a hoof print, that, Paul?
No, that looked like a fist print.
Right? No, sir. No, sir. Ain't no fist touch my face. No, sir. Now, you want a dead son-in-law, Miss Seeley? You keep on advising him like you doing.
His life be over soon. Heaven lasts always.
Girl, you ought to bash Mr. head open and think about heaven later.
Caller?
Yes.
Good afternoon. Mrs. Calling?
My name is Pam.
Can you say your name one more time?
Pam.
Miss Sophia. Is that you, Miss Sophia? Now, that's my ex-wife. That's my baby mama right there.
Uh-oh.
How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great. So glad to hear your voice. You know, we're having a conversation talking about the impact of domestic violence on children. And what we were talking about is how violence can be perpetrated. It can go both ways, not just from men to women, but from women to men, from parent to child, but how important it is to create demonstrate healthy relationship or modeling for our children in order to support their healthy development. So you got a comment you want to talk about?
Yes, I have a comment. And the comment that I have is that I think for women become violent towards men. And I think this is the piece that I don't think people talk about a lot. But in relationships, most of the time, a woman and a man, both people are coming to the relationship and they're broken. And when you take that brokenness and you intertwine that brokenness with some more brokenness, then you tap into the other person's insecurities, and then that breeds anger and bitterness and from way back when. And I think that perpetuates an environment for violence, like, you know, towards the male or towards the female, and also towards the children, because you're in an environment where you feel angry because your needs aren't being met. And it may be all the way back from your childhood or just from past relationships that you never healed from. So you just take that in and out of relationships, and it just creates this toxic environment. And I think no one takes the time to stop and say, how do my actions affect my children? Your children are watching you, and they become mini yous. So when they see that, then they take that brokenness and they take that into their relationship. And it just keeps breeding a cycle and a cycle and a cycle of brokenness that's never healed.
So this cycle of abuse, cycle of violence. But let me, just for the record, let me say, I wasn't broken until you choked me. I was all right.
Hi, Pam.
See, you want to play. Now, we're trying to get somebody to deliver, and he's up here. You don't want me to tell the truth on this. But anyway, that's what happens. Like, I think that's what happened. You were broken when I got married to you, and I was broken. I had issues from my past. You had issues from my past, from your past, and then we got together with all of our brokenness, and it just became so toxic. And I was angry, and you were angry, and then, you know, we lashed out at each other. You, for some reason, you didn't feel that your needs were getting met in the relationship, nor did I, and we lashed out at each other. And I think the fortunate thing for us is that, you know, we knew God, and we could come to a place where we asked God to take this and help us, and, you know, we've evolved beyond that. That's the big thing.
Well, you know what, Pam, I do appreciate you calling. We have to get together sometime in the future. I'm gonna get that restraining order. I'm just joking, dear.
Okay.
I love you and I appreciate you. Thanks for calling.
Okay, bye-bye.
One of the things when she said broken people coming together, but what perpetrates or perpetuates the brokenness, and it's how we think. It is so common to hear people say, but all couples fight. And when I hear that, I correct people right away. Think about that. If we go around saying, but all couples fight, and if I think of fighting as literally putting my hands on you, I'm affirming that all couples fight. And I'm literally sending the message, it's okay because all couples do it. But we don't talk about couples solve issues. Couples solve their problems. We go around and we say, but all couples fight. That's normal for all couples to fight. But we don't, and what kids don't see is how do couples resolve issues in their relationships.
But I want to say, because I want to ask Roman this question: have you ever hit a woman in the presence of a child?
No, I've like I said, my situation that I just got in. It was more of a shoving. But it wasn't in the presence of my child, and that
or even their child, because sometimes men date women, and the children in that relationship is not their blood related.
No, it was always if there was any children present, I would just leave, and normally I would always try to leave, and the majority of the time, at least in my situation, it was she didn't want me to leave, or she blocked the way, or she did something, and and like I said, as a young man at that time. I let it go so far. I was already upset. I'm not gonna lie. I was already upset, so I let it build.
So you have not ever hit a woman in the presence of a child. What about calling a woman out of her name in the presence of a child?
That definitely happens a lot.
And because here's again, now would you classify, Ms. Fields, that as being abusive relationship or violent relationship? I'm confused.
Abuse.
It's abuse.
Yeah,
okay.
It's abuse.
And probably most women listening to the program will say that the emotional and verbal abuse, or that they suffer and endure in relationships, has more of a lasting effect on them than
the violence,
than the physical.
Absolutely.
Okay.
The research the studies that have been done, most women, you're right, most women have said the effects of the verbal, emotional, and mental abuse goes and lasts much longer than the physical abuse, because those physical wounds eventually heal, even though you still have scars. But what it does to us as the human being goes much deeper.
What I read a couple of days ago was that some women are experiencing some medical conditions later on in life that's directly connected to the violence, the physical violence that they endured in their younger years.
Sure.
So have you heard anything about that?
Well, it's not just later on in life, but it's from the very beginning. And what happens is a lot of times they may not make the connection. So I've been in this abusive relationship or relationships. I go to the doctor, and I'm not telling anyone what's happening. But over time, I start to develop all these other symptoms and problems, and then they can trace it back to, well, okay, all of these other these symptoms now, what we're seeing now, it may be related to what was happening to you years ago.
I remember growing up, and I'm sure that Roman can attest to this, but there was a particular family member, and there was constant violence in the home, physical violence. And I can remember just being a visitor in that home environment, witnessing that violence firsthand, feeling helpless, feeling scared, not wanting to go over there because there was so much violence. And the thing is that it could just spark at any time. So the message that I would say to parents is that don't send your children over into environments, even if it's relatives who are, if there is domestic violence in the home, it's not healthy for children to be exposed to that.
But then speaking of that, Jermaine, we got sent over there for corrective action, and that was the craziest part about it.
That was crazy.
Okay, but wait a minute. Roman, you said you had no one that you could talk to. So imagine that.
You couldn't talk to me because I was
right.
But wait, imagine you're this parent and you have nowhere to send your kids, but you got to go to work or you got to do what you do. So the only people that are available are these people that
and we didn't have fathers who were very present in our lives. So since our mothers had brothers, they took on that surrogate father. They became surrogate fathers to us and our disciplinaries. But we're gonna have to wrap this piece up. But the question that I have to ask you, Roman, and then I'll also ask you, Ms. Fields, is what message would you like to give to parents, to men who are abusive towards their mate, especially if children are connected to that relationship?
I like to say to men, first of all, think back to your childhood and what you went through and what you don't want to happen. Whatever you went through and how you kept it a secret, your child can be going through the same thing. Your cousin, anybody in your life is going to be affected by what you do and what you say. You might not see it and they might not express it, but as a man, speaking as a man, you need to learn to be a man. And being a man is accepting responsibility for your actions and change your behavior. You don't have to do what's been done to you.
Good advice.
And to add to that, each of us should ask ourselves, Are we healthy? Are we happy? Are we safe in the relationship we're in? Are we happy? Are we healthy? Are we safe in the relationship we're in? That's men and women. And if we're not, then what do we need to do?
Well, I got out of mine 'cause I got tired of being kicked around. So follow my lead, okay, brothers? If a woman beating on you, you're going to have to tell her I got to go.
Exactly.
But it has been a great conversation. Listen, for the listening audience, you can email us some of your suggestions and comments to freshstart860@gmail.com. You can tweet us at FreshStart860, or you can Facebook us or like us at Facebook at Fresh Start Today. So this concludes part 1. Next week, we're going to have Wiser Choice Inc. coming, and we're going to have an on-air DV class, So that's going to be really interesting. It also gives some men some advice in terms of what they can do to better use their power and control. And somehow, some way, we're going to weave something in here for women, because we got to stop these women from hitting and beating on men. Because most women know you cannot hit a man and beat him. Unless your name is Miss Sophie.
There you go.
So we're going to take a break right now, and feel free to join in the conversation. We have Dr. Sebastian Sapija from Sebastian Family Psychology Practice. He's going to be talking about the art of multiculturalism counseling. So join us on the other side of the hour. Do you know someone in foster care? Have you been in foster care? Do you have a child in foster care? Are you a grandparent or relative caring for a family member? Are you considering becoming a foster parent? Then tune in every Wednesday at 3 p.m. to Fresh Start Today on WNOV 860 AM to engage in thought-provoking conversations with families and providers about child welfare services, both locally and nationally. Together, we can save our children. Good afternoon. You are tuned into Fresh Start Today. I'm your host, Jermaine Reed, and I have in the studio with me Dr. Sebastian Sapija, and he's with Sebastian Family Psychology Practice, located at 1720 West Florist Avenue. And we're going to be talking today about cross-cultural or transcultural counseling and how important it is and how you can master that if you're a service provider, a counselor or a therapist. But I'm sure there's some techniques that you're going to talk about today that we can translate to other helping professions as well. So good afternoon, Dr. Sebastian.
Good afternoon to you, my friend, Mr. Jermaine.
Oh, great, my friend. I'm so glad to have you here in the studio, and I know we've been preparing for this for a couple of weeks. But first, start off telling us a little bit about the services that you provide, a little bit of history about your program.
Okay, well, I just want to start off by thanking you for the privilege and the opportunity to be here for a conversation with you and your audience, and also to thank the radio station for the hard work that you're doing to reach out to our community.
Oh, thank you.
And in particular, this issue of counseling, mental health, trying to understand it within the context of multiculturalism is very much relevant today. Now, our agency, known as Sebastian Family Psychology Practice, which is now located in Glendale, 1720 West Florist, has been around for a while. And we moved from 91st and Silver Springs, where we had been for almost 20 years. And now we are going into about 5 years at the new location.
Okay.
I've been privileged to have and head a very important and team with the assistance, the able assistance of my friend and partner in life, Yvonne Sempija, as our director of operations, and a large team of therapists. We are lucky enough to have a team that has been intentionally built up to composed of multi-racial, multilingual, multi-expertise levels, from psychiatrists, psychologists, psychotherapists, therapists in training, parenting assistants, case aid, and our translators. So that team, I'm so proud of it because it's doing a heavy lifting in meeting the needs of our community, one person at a time.
So you have a very diverse workforce. You said multilingual, multiracial. And what's the other racial? No, it wasn't racial. It was multidisciplinary.
Multidisciplinary, yes.
Yes. That's interesting because I believe in having a conversation with you in the past. You indicated that the clients you serve represent every continent on the earth, literally. And that's the one reason why I want to bring you on the show, because when I look at the composition of your staff, you have what are some of the countries that that your staff are from?
We have, in terms of languages, we represent about 15 languages from different parts of the world.
Okay.
Our team is including people that are from Uganda, like myself, and my wife and my other colleagues, friends from Kenya, from Tanzania. We have co-workers that are speaking and the Mang language.
Okay.
We are able to serve through on-call interpreters, people that are speaking Arabic. We are able to serve people that are speaking Hindi, folks from India, Pakistan. Now, the other major group that we're also serving are from Southeast Asia.
Wow.
That includes a large majority now that are from Burma,
Okay.
now known as Myanmar, a group that has different ethnic groups with specific languages. And that is those few examples are among many over the last several years that we have intentionally reached out to refugees and immigrants as a subset of our services to the mainstream population.
Now, because the minority community is expanding in America, it pretty much has required that all mental health and social work professionals or helping professionals increase their multicultural awareness and competence if they are going to be effective in serving these communities in an honorable, respectable manner. Would you agree with that?
I do agree.
Okay, go ahead.
And in fact, the facts of the realities on the ground are that as our societies are becoming more diverse in terms of language, in terms of background, in terms of educational experiences, in terms of faith, and in terms of the origins, by necessity, there is a need to adapt to the demographic changes.
And even sexual orientation.
That's right.
Yes.
And
So
sexual
it's separate.
orientation.
Yeah.
And so as the discussion that you are raising is really much needed, and I hope that it continues to see that our understanding of mental health should be really an extension of health and wellness. So that's why we talk about behavioral health as opposed to just focusing on mental health,
Okay.
because those
Behavioral
factors
health, okay.
those factors are impacting about our sense of wellness as individuals, as families, as communities, and then as a nation.
Okay.
And unfortunately, when we talk about nations and look at the geopolitical facts on the ground worldwide, the causes of war and the factors that contribute to refugee status or force people to migrate have also created their own scenario that has to be understood in how it impacts people's sense of wellness and comfort.
So let me ask you something. What is multicultural, transcultural, cross-cultural counseling? What is that?
That's a big one, Mr. My friend. But I'm going to take a crack at this from several angles. Cross-cultural counseling, also known as multicultural counseling or transcultural, these are different terms that are used to really explain the phenomenon of the counseling experience. When you look at it from the different ethnic backgrounds, religious backgrounds, and trying to understand that unique relationship between the provider, the therapist, and the client,
Okay.
the therapist community and the client communities, they eventually develop a relationship that has to be understood in a very unique way. We know very well from research that what benefits a therapeutic relationship are two leading indicators. One is therapeutic client alliance.
Okay.
The relationship between the therapist and their client. That relationship has to be strong, based on respect, non-judgmental, but also objective, with creating a space in that relationship that enables the client and their therapist to discuss some very difficult issues that are important towards healing.
So how do you think that people need to facilitate that process, this counseling situation where people are talking about very sensitive topics and they're coming from different ethnic communities, cultural environments? So if you are a counselor and you're from Uganda,
Correct.
and you are going to have engage in therapy with someone from a Latino community, what are the things that you think that you have to keep in mind or have to be at the forefront that's going to guide that relationship as you attempt to engage
Thank you.
client?
It goes back to those. I was finishing the second core component
Okay.
in addition to the therapeutic alliance. The second core component is the clinician's preparedness,
Preparedness.
education, experience, and preparedness for getting into that unique relationship of being a behavioral health provider. And we find that people that are well prepared in the art and science of psychotherapy, first, but also secondly, being able to develop clinically important relationships and workspaces, those become critical incidents in setting the groundwork needed for two people of different racial, language, or ethnic backgrounds to work together within the sanctity of the therapeutic relationship.
So, let me ask you this. Can cultural differences be a problem in the context of therapy or counseling? Because historically, some people say cultural differences historically have been viewed as deficits. And when we look at multicultural counseling, some research I was doing tied it back to the civil rights, that it was rooted in social injustice and parallels with the civil rights movement. So up until that time, people really weren't thinking about how important it is to honor the culture and the values of someone who was not part of mainstream.
Correct. And of course, we attribute that to unfortunately the long history of racial tensions in this country.
Okay.
But over the course of time, and thankfully, with the willingness of people to have a healthy dialogue about our differences, it is possible to have healthy relationships that also eventually translate into good working relationships that are promoted by a therapeutic alliance and the clinician's preparedness. We know that the counseling relationship is really a relationship based on values, on beliefs, addressing people's thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. And in that dialogue, we cannot avoid looking at how our values inform what we bring within the clinical relationship. When a client comes into a relationship with a counselor, they expect guidance. They expect a healing process. They expect to overcome significant things and barriers that are impacting on their wellness. So there has to be an assumption and a presumption of trust, whereby the provider gets the privilege of knowing in a very intimate way their client on issues that the client may not be talking about in any other setting. And so within that relationship, the clinician has to be ready and willing to explore their own thoughts, their own beliefs, their own biases, including racial, religious, or gender orientation.
How often is that explored, though? When we talk about biases, because we all are socialized within our cultural context,
Correct.
And we tend to have biases as helping professionals. But how often do we discuss this, or how do we evaluate this, or how often do you recommend that we evaluate this? Let's talk about that a bit.
Those differences, all clinicians, and I believe that the universities around that are involved in the preparation of future and current clinicians take great time to prepare their counselors to understand differences and charge them with the responsibility of understanding themselves first, including being aware of the most intimate biases, beliefs, and values that we have, which eventually are going to be involved in the therapeutic relationship. So I'm answering that question by saying that through training, academically, through consultation, through supervision, the provider is tasked with the responsibility of being aware of those issues. In turn, then, when they are in the counseling relationship, they end up also having to be sensitive to those issues as they come up in the therapeutic relationship.
Okay, so now, is the goal to be aware of our biases rather than to eliminate them?
To be aware of them and in a healthy way,
okay,
work with them in such a way that they cause no harm.
Important that you say that, and cause no harm. The reason why I bring this up, because when I think about, let's look at this from a child welfare perspective. The last report that I read that was published by Department of Children and Families in terms of the population, their annual report was 2012, December 2012. And in there, when we look at the racial composition of the Bureau's client base, 68% of those kids or families are African American. 68% that were served in 2012 were African American. Now, when we look at service providers, there's not a lot of service providers, African American psychiatrists, psychologists in Milwaukee, which means that a large number of these children are being served by clinicians who do not share the same racial or ethnic and even cultural makeup as the clients. So I want to know, can racial differences, can cultural differences impact the therapeutic process? Because joining and connecting with your client is very key, but does race sometimes become a barrier? Language becomes a barrier, you know?
Yes, I will come at that from several angles. You raised a very important question on the hard work that is being done by the Bureau, and indeed it is hard work, you are very much aware. We have many young, middle-aged, and senior social workers out there who are trying to do their best in terms of protecting children and families. And yes, you're right, that the good number of that, close to 70% of those clients are within from the minority African American population.
Okay.
Those are the facts on the ground. Now, the sensitive question you raised is really should be an ongoing discussion that when you're looking at social workers who wholeheartedly want to do the right thing in protecting and providing safety for children and families, they too are taught, coached, supervised to monitor their own biases. Mm-hmm. And they are human beings. This is a very intensely sensitive, stressful job. As you're aware that doing that job puts our social workers in the front line of the larger discussion issues that are very sensitive on race that cannot be ignored. And it is my hope is that, and I'm almost very confident about this, that in every agency there's sensitivity to those issues. And there's also a need to continue learning and being able to address those issues in a way that does not harm the process or the purpose.
Well, you know, I think, and I agree with everything you're saying, this is definitely hard work, and I think that the Bureau of Milwaukee Child Welfare, DCF, is doing what they can to provide quality services to children and family. You had mentioned causing no hurt, and that should be a guiding principle, whether you're talking about in mental health, the mental health community, or in social work, child welfare. But sometimes people are injured because we aren't aware of our biases, or because of the corporate culture or the culture in a particular field, you know, that does not support aggressively multiculturalism and diversity, and not just in paper, but actually demonstrating this.
Correct.
So we want to make sure that, you know, that people do know that we work in a field that is very difficult, but I think that's why conversations like this is very important to have.
Right. The task of having cultural competence,
okay,
or cultural sensitivity, or cultural wisdom, I'm using those terms very, very intentionally. That discussion has to continue to acknowledge the facts on the ground that we are all people that are from different backgrounds, of different races, different gender, and different orientations that have to work together. Now, by being culturally sensitive or respecting those differences, it's going to allow us to do our job better and generate the needed discussion. I also need to note, my friend Jermaine, that when it comes to our minority populations, we have a disproportionate fact of not finding enough providers that are of the same race,
okay,
or even the same language skills to serve each other.
So that's
a very huge barrier, especially in the field of mental health services.
So how do we? So I guess that's where the importance of training in cultural sensitivity, cultural awareness, cultural competence, multicultural. That's why that's so important, because the disproportionate numbers of African Americans who are being served by people who or anyways by individuals who do not share the same ethnic or racial background.
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So that sensitivity is very important to address I'm aware that
Sure.
I'm aware very delicately that most therapists, most agencies do a good job to try to educate their staff to be ready to address those issues. And also, I think, we know that there is choice in terms of getting services. Clients have a choice as to who they can see. Insurance companies also have not only a responsibility, but they are sensitive to ensure that the client gets a choice as to who they can go to, including requesting whether the therapist should be a male or female or of a specific ethnic background.
And that's why
that choice is
and
important.
that's why I think the training in terms of cultural competence and sensitivity is so important, because the reality is that we don't have a lot of African American or African psychologists, psychiatrists for individuals to choose from in this area.
Correct.
So if let me kind of just go this way. There are some people who may say that I don't want to engage in counseling if I can't have a male counselor, if I can't have a counselor who shares the same race that I have, because I don't believe in, I think there's going to be some biases. I don't think they're going to understand me. But here's the other piece, and I think that we have to at some point talk about this. How much influence does Euro-American values have on the field of psychology, the field of or mental health, behavioral health, the field of education, the field of social work? And if someone feels that I can identify with this, or I don't believe in this process or in this service that's been offered, is that an issue of noncompliance? And particularly for families who have a court order that you need to have a psychological evaluation, that you need anger management, you need individual therapy, but if you don't share the same values because you're concerned about how it's delivered, how do we address that?
From several angles, and it's a very complicated question. Thank you for asking for it.
He's so polite. That's why I like that, Mr. Sebastian.
But I'm being genuine about this. You're doing a very good job at this. When a person, whether they are in court or they are coming through their HMO referral and they are requesting for services, they should be able to express their preference. Mm-hmm. And there should be every effort made to meet the requests as indicated. Now, matching the therapist as requested with the client should be a priority in as much as possible if it can be met. If it cannot be met, that client would be educated to articulate their choices and their desires so that the therapist or the agency makes an effort of trying to meet it.
Okay.
If not, then the clinician would be tasked with exploring why that particular client has those particular concerns. Sometimes the concerns are based in fear, they're based in mistrust, they're based in a bad experience.
Okay.
And once they're addressed, the mistrust goes down. And as you know, we are still dealing with a high level of stigma with mental health in general, as a population. And a lot of coaching out there is being done to reduce that stigma. But so in that case, as we're dealing with the stigma, it's also going to include addressing the reluctance of our clients who are coming forward. I'm also pleased to let you know that from our experience over the last 25 years, we have found that by working with people from different parts of the world, both US-born and non-US-born, we have come to realize that once there is respect in the clinical relationship, once the clinician is comfortable with who they are, if they remain sensitive and humble to learn from the culture, they are able to be as effective as would be a clinical recommendation.
So one thing you would suggest they do, they have to study or research that community or that population that they're going to serve. Okay, well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, I want to kind of talk about assimilation versus acculturation, and where does that fall here when it comes to receiving mental health services. So we'll talk about that a little bit when we come back. The East African tradition of the Maasai tribe is to greet one another with the words Kasirian Ngera, which is Swahili for, so how are the children? In that community, the well-being of their children is the highest priority. If you are interested in participating in thought-provoking conversations about the well-being of children and families, please tune in every Wednesday at 3 p.m. to Fresh Start Today on 860 AM WNOV. Together, we can save our children. You are tuned in to Fresh Start Today. My guest in the studio is Dr. Sebastian Simpesia from Sebastian Family Psychology Practice, and we're talking about transcultural counseling or cross-cultural counseling and giving some tips in terms of how important it is and how to facilitate that counseling or therapeutic process. And Dr. Sebastian, in a minute, I'm going to ask you to talk about the work that MPS is doing around mental health, offering mental health services, so don't let me forget. But I want to kind of go back to something. Before break, we were talking about how that many cultural groups do not share the same values that are implied by the methods, and sometimes do not share the counselor's expectations for the conduct or the outcome of a counseling session and what people need to do to kind of manage that piece right there. But the question I have for you is because I think sometimes we can make an assumption about people. We can group people, throw everybody into one group. We could say black people, or we could say Hispanics, Latino, and we fail to realize how heterogeneous those communities are. For example, when you could say blacks, that can mean Jamaican, Haitian, African American. You say Latino or Hispanic, that can translate to just a number of different communities, who identify or have some type of connection, but yet they have their own unique set of languages, values, and traditions, and it kind of, how can I say this, devalue, in a sense, who that person is or discount that person, who they are, dishonors them to a certain degree when we do not celebrate that full person. So the question that I have for you is, when we deal with acculturation and assimilation, I'm going to give a definition of another word for today for acculturation. Acculturation is basically a process where the cultural aspects of the majority community are adapted without losing the traditions and customs of the minority community. Assimilation is different in that it's the process by which a persons acquire the social and psychological characteristics of a larger group. In doing so, it also implies that they lose a part of themselves. And part of themselves can be certain characteristics like language, it can be self-identity, customs, traditions, and even religion, that you can lose yourself in the assimilation process. So when we think about acculturation, we think about assimilation, we think about counseling, and we think about Euro-American values that govern counseling, how much of a person do you have to lose or can be lost in engaging in a therapeutic process? Can you be who you really are and still get the help that you need in a counseling setting?
That's a huge task.
Is that a huge task?
Yes.
Just chip away a little bit.
Let me chip at it for a minute. Well, essentially, I want to reemphasize that the relationship between the therapist and the client is really focused on a healthy relationship built on a good alliance, relying on the capability and preparedness of the clinician. I use for my clinic and my team, we have two terms we use, that in the therapeutic relationship, there is the art of therapy and the science behind therapy.
Art and science, okay.
And the reasoning behind this is that the science is the task taken on through education, clinical research, being informed on understanding about the dynamics of the therapeutic process that contribute to a good outcomes of that relationship. There's very good science, and there are evidence-based models that are out there that clinicians who are responsible do utilize. The art comes in by me, the provider, bringing who I am and my skills in that therapeutic relationship through speech, through my presence, through my interaction with the client, to make possible a space that contributes to healing.
So can you have the art and can you have the science, can you have one and not have the other? Let me put it that way. Can you have one and not have the other? Because I know a lot of people who are educated.
Yes.
But if art deals with your personality and your presentation, sometimes,
it doesn't mix.
It doesn't
and
mix.
that's why you have clients who say, you know what, I went in, I talked to that man, I talked to that woman, we didn't connect.
And that could be in a medical profession, that could be in a school setting environment. That art is very important. And some people don't have the art of counseling.
That's right.
They have the science, but not the art. But the art is just as critical because you can have all the information, all the knowledge, all the training in the world, all the education in the world. But if you don't know how to present yourself,
it doesn't happen. It's not happening.
It's not happening.
So our friends in the medicine talk about the bedside manners, okay? Whereby you have a professional in medicine who can be very efficient as a scientist,
right?
But lacks the bedside manners. Guess what? It ain't happening.
I ran into those.
Okay.
I had to fire my
you have a lot of parents out there who have their pediatricians, and they love those pediatricians for a reason, because they feel and experience that the peds care about their kids, care about their clients. The same example is also common and expected within the Mental Health or Behavioral Health Alliance. The counseling relationship has to have that space where the client and their loved ones feel, experience being respected, being heard, having their needs being validated, and addressed in a non-judgmental manner. Those become critical pieces. Now, you are asking me to also talk about the losing oneself in that space.
Mm-hmm.
The self is a very clinically significant issue in the therapeutic process. And effective therapy is going to really be respecting that the person does not lose themselves. Rather, in the process of therapy, the person comes to a better and deeper understanding of themselves.
Okay.
Through insight, through psychoeducation, through coaching, so that the skill sets obtained through that therapy enable the person to live better, to get away from the moments of hurting and wounds, to moving towards recovery, towards optimal functioning.
Let me kind of change tracks a little bit because I definitely want to get to the MPS piece. But when we're talking about making assumptions about certain communities, that just grouping everybody in the same bowl or same situation, categorizing everyone, I was reading that in the Latino community, that fatalism, that basically that's the idea that the inevitable is going to happen. What's going to happen is going to happen. It is what it is, you know. So there may be a lack of motivation or determination to advocate for oneself and or even their children. So if fatalism is a value that someone from a different community is bringing to the therapeutic process, this is part of who they are, their culture, their belief. And let's say this person presents with a court order, or their children removed because they failed to protect the child. You know, there were safety conditions or issues, risk. If they don't feel that, you know, nothing I do is going to change the outcome, how do you get a person who don't share the same value? How do you get that particular client to comply or to assimilate? To what are we doing?
One of the main cultural differences that I have learned, that I've lived in this country now for over 35 years, is the American idea on respecting the individual, and making the one count. So in doing that, there is the way our culture is raising children now is for them to speak up for themselves. You talk about the issue of fatalism within the Latino community, whereby one would feel helpless or that they cannot do anything about a thing. That may be more of a generalization, but I can also relate to it in terms of people coming in from cultures where there has been oppression, political, religious, where people don't have a voice. In that sense, when people have been raised and socialized into being quiet, into not having their voice heard, they don't speak up. It doesn't mean that they're fatalistic, but they have learned to accommodate their responses to what the political facts on the ground are. So within the therapeutic relationship, the role of the therapist then is to find a voice for that client, regardless of the culture. And we have the specific techniques of empowering a client so that they can speak up for themselves. And through that method, as we're working with our friends that are, whether they're coming from Iraq, or Sudan, or Eritrea, or Liberia, or China, or Burma,
or 27th and Brown.
Or 27th and Brown. Okay? The same techniques are important.
Right.
Because we know that once a person believes strongly in who they are, they feel valued, they feel respected, they're able to stand up for themselves, their mental health is improved. When mental health and mental fitness is improved, people's functioning is also improved, so that we become better. We aim to produce, to have optimal functioning. And so, with that premise, I want to go back to the idea of the differences of the different cultures that we have. We are at a very good moment where mental health or behavioral health as a field is going to grow exponentially. The federal government is reporting through the Center for Disease Control and the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration. They are reporting that by 2020, issues of mental health and substance use and or abuse are going to surpass all physical illnesses in contributing to disabilities worldwide.
Wow.
It's that powerful.
Wow.
And our friends in medicine are also now promoting the concept of integrated care, where you're looking at medicine and its allied services to promote health and wellness in such a way that emotional health and physical health are part of a continuum.
You brought up the Center for Disease Control, and I want to kind of talk a little bit about this next question so that we can have time to definitely talk about the MPS mental health services as well as some of the other services that your clinic offer, the
parenting assistant,
Love and Logic model. But let me ask you this question. You bring up a point in terms of engaging so many different communities. There is this piece out here, this issue, this public concern with the Ebola virus. And I think today the third person on U.S. soil has been confirmed, is diagnosed with Ebola. Now, in working and engaging and interacting with so many different communities, what considerations, if any, do you recommend therapists and other helping professionals take in responding to the public health crisis like Ebola and other highly infectious or communicable diseases? What should the position of the mental health community be?
A very good question, very sensitive by its nature, but let me see if I can answer it from this angle. Clearly, the effects of Ebola are terrifying the entire world, and we have to share our sympathies for the regions that are affected and the families that have been victimized. It's at the same time we have to be sensitive to what the medical professionals at the national level and the WHO are telling us in terms of how to react.
Okay.
It's going to be very important to not sow hysteria, whereby people respond by fear and in the process do more harm. It's very unfortunate that there are those 3 cases that have been identified. We pray to God that the condition is contained.
My understanding that it's not transmittable unless it's active. So, just the fact that people can travel, and if you're in a service or helping professional and you're in homes, you're engaging or connecting with people, what are some of the precautions? But I guess as we move further down this timeline, we're going to get more information, and it's important to get information. And I think it's also important to have a competent conversation around this because so many of our people are being affected, whether, like you said, we're global, we're connected to people over in Africa and all parts of the world. So I want to talk about MPS because we only have a few more minutes. What is the work that MPS is doing around mental health services?
Well, MPS has been doing an incredible work over the last 4 to 5 years.
Incredible work?
Incredible work. Incredible work on promoting mental health services, mental fitness within the schools. And the intent of the district over the last 5 years has been to collaborate with local partners on the ground who are delivering behavioral health services in the schools to make possible our children, our parents, our staff to address issues of that affect mental health and wellness. So they are specific. The program is going ahead and is having results and is also contributing to reducing stigma towards mental health services. And our clinic, along with our partners at Pathfinders and Aurora, we are working all together with other community partners to ensure that we're bringing those services within the schools. It's very promising, and in my view, I'm so happy as it contributes to reducing the fear and the stigma about mental health.
All right. Well, it sounds great, Dr. Sebastian. If you would like to call Dr. Sebastian, you can reach him at Sebastian Family Psychology Practice. Telephone number there is 414-247-0801, 414-247-0801. What's some final announcements to wrap up the show with? Remember that October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. November 13th, the annual Black Child Development Institute Recognition and Community Service Banquet is going to be held here in Milwaukee, and you can find more information by going to bcdi-milwaukee.org. That's bcdi-milwaukee.org. Foster parents who are listening, remember that October is Fire Safety Month, so be sure to change your battery and your smoke detectors. Remember to comply with all the rules and regulations that's in DCF 56. Make sure you have your fire extinguishers close or near to your kitchen area. And then also, too, foster care agencies, today was the last day for you to get your business registration turned into the Bureau of Milwaukee Child Welfare. So if you haven't done that yet, you better work on it before tomorrow. And the last thing is, we need to hear from you. If you think this program is of value, that is important, please give me a call at 414-351-1100. Let us know what your thoughts are. You can tweet us at FreshStart860. You can email us at freshstart860@gmail.com. If there's topics you'd like to discuss or people you'd like to have us invite on, please give me a call. We need to hear from you. Thank you and have a blessed week.